Welcome to Arirang TV's special continuing coverage of COVID-19. I'm Min Son-hee. The job market is slowly coming to life here in Korea, and with non-face-to-face interaction becoming the norm amid efforts to fight the virus, recruitment methods and work patterns are changing. We have more on that later on the program, but first, as always, here are the headlines with our Kwon-soa and Noaram. Welcome.
Hello.
So I understand the number of new infections has doubled here in Korea.
Yes, and that is largely attributed to the emergence of a recent cluster infection at an e-commerce company's distribution center in the city of Bucheon. And that's why we have a daily rise in the 70s for the first time in more than 50 days. So for a closer look, we have 79 new cases and 68 of those are local transmissions. The death toll remains unchanged for another day at 269, and we have 34 additional people in treatment or quarantine, and 45 people have fully recovered. Now, by region, the metropolitan area is mostly affected by these new cases, with Seoul, Incheon, and Gyeonggi-do province all reporting more than 20 new cases. We do have other parts of the country with cases sporadically, including in the city of Daegu, and 7 were airport detections. Now, according to the government's daily briefing in the morning, as of today, 69 cases in total are linked to the Kupang distribution center, up from 54 confirmed yesterday. And out of the 69, 55 were direct infections, while 14 cases were transmissions to families or other contacts. The government and local authorities are taking all-out efforts in conducting COVID-19 tests on anyone who could have been exposed to the virus linked to the distribution center. And as of Wednesday, tests on 83% of the more than 4,000 people that may be connected to that outbreak have been completed, with the rest of the screenings expected to be finished today. Officials, meanwhile, asked residents in the metropolitan area to refrain from going to non-essential gatherings for the time being, as there are concerns the Kupang case could lead to multiple chain transmissions like in the Itaewon cluster.
Right, and given these circumstances, a number of schools have decided to keep their doors closed, I hear.
Yes, we're talking about some 800 schools. That's elementary, middle, and high schools, as well as kindergartens, that decided not to open the gates for their students. For the first time since high school seniors returned to school last week, a senior high school student in the capital has been confirmed with COVID-19. And that's why the school closed down immediately, as the government had instructed schools to close in the case of an outbreak. The same was done at other schools that share the same schoolyard, as well as other nearby education facilities. And so they returned to online classes. Meanwhile, most of the 28 people who had close contact with the student were screened and so far tested negative. Daegu also had a senior student who tested positive late Tuesday, which led to the closure of 6 schools, and around 250 schools in the city of Bucheon postponed their reopening yesterday by a week for now, and that on the back of the Kupang cluster infection.
Meanwhile, on the international front, Poland is poised to ease a number of restrictions starting from this weekend, I hear.
Yes, and that's including a revision to their mandatory face mask wearing. Beginning Saturday, it won't be mandatory anymore to wear masks in public, while maintaining social distancing of 2 meters remains a basic rule. The Polish government also announced Wednesday that gatherings of up to 150 people will be permitted in the coming days, while facilities such as cinemas, theaters, and gyms are to reopen on June 6th. Restrictions on churches are also expected to be relaxed. Poland, which is home to 38 million people, was one of the countries that responded early against COVID-19, having reported less cases compared to many other nations in Europe with a similar population. It has a total of a little less than 22,500 cases with 1,028 fatalities. But the country is still reporting an average of 300 to 400 daily cases. And a country that's been among the epicenters in Europe, Italy, is dealing with another uptick in caseload and deaths as more than 580 new infections were reported Wednesday, up from less than 400 a day before and 300 on Monday. The country has been relaxing measures, trying to get the economy going again, but by, for instance, opening beaches and aiming to get tourists back. However, with Italians, especially young people, shown enjoying their time in groups, some restrictions had to be reimposed. And no time for relief in many parts of the globe. We have the U.S. with more than 1.7 million cases. And also we know that it has surpassed the 100,000 mark when it comes to the death toll. And that looks to be a number higher than the death toll from U.S. soldiers killed in the Korean War and the Vietnam War combined. And we also have total cases surpassing 400,000 in Brazil. And the UK and Italy have over 37,000 and 33,000 fatalities, respectively. And for a brief look at our map, we have a total of 5.78 million cases worldwide and a death toll at over 357,000. The death rate is estimated at around 2% right now, and almost 2.5 million people have fully recovered.
All right, so thank you for that. I'll come back to you for the domestic updates after the regular briefing.
All right.
Aram, still no treatment for COVID-19, but Korea is looking to approve the Ebola drug remdesivir.
That's right. The Korean government has begun its review of the approval of remdesivir for emergency use. Now, the US FDA has already approved it for emergency use over there. Now, the review by the Korean government comes after promising results from clinical trials conducted by the US National Institutes of Health. It was reported to be capable of reducing recovery time by about 30%, as well as lowering the mortality rate. Korean health authorities are in discussions with the Food and Drug Safety Ministry, and a decision is expected in the coming days, if not early as today, in fact, if possible. And the KCDC said that if approved, the drug would only be used on a limited number of patients. Now, these limited patients will likely be those in critical condition, as tests have shown that remdesivir is more effective in treating people who are severely ill.
Right. The reopening of schools in Korea, I understand, is gaining attention overseas, Aram.
That's right. Foreign media has taken quite an interest to the reopening of schools. The Washington Post, for example, reported with the headline, "The pictures say it all, how South Korean schools are reopening." Now, the paper showed photos of school classrooms as well as cafeterias practicing social distancing and disease prevention measures. Now, one of them was from a high school in Daejeon, where transparent plastic partitions were installed between seats in the cafeteria, and others showed classrooms being disinfected as well. So they're taking quite an interest.
And you also have a poignant story of how Korea is not forgetting Korean War veterans in the UK during the pandemic.
That's right. The Royal Hospital Chelsea is home to military veterans, including those who fought in the Korean War. Now, Korea has sent some 30,000 masks to the veterans and their family members as a sign of gratitude for their service. And Korea's ambassador to the UK, Pagana, held a video call with one of the veterans, Philip Shannon. Now, Shannon thanked Korea for its support and said Korea is the only country to remember the sacrifices of British soldiers in the Korean War. And another Korean War veteran held up a card that read, "Thank you" in Korean. So that was quite a nice touch there. Now, Ambassador Park also thanked the veterans for their service. Now, Shannon unfortunately also delivered some bad news. 10 of the hospital's residents actually died from COVID-19 earlier this month, but hopefully that number will go down in the times to come.
Right. Okay, Aram, thank you for that. We'll see you again on Friday. It's time now for the regular afternoon briefing on COVID-19. Health authorities are understandably on high alert here in Korea as an outbreak at a logistics center in Bucheon, a city in Gyeonggi province. As our Kwon So-ah reported, is triggering an alarming rise in the number of new infections. The tally as of early Thursday show we have 79 confirmed cases, raising our total to 11,344. We'll come back to you after the briefing.
Let us now begin our regular briefing for May 28th, Thursday, on the COVID-19 response here in South Korea. We have a total of 79 new cases, and the total number of confirmed cases now stands at 11,344. and this includes 1,232 imported cases from overseas. And additionally, 45 more people have fully recovered, and a total of 735 people are in quarantine undergoing treatment. There were no additional fatalities as of yesterday. Out of the 79 new cases, 11 were imported, while 68 were local transmissions. As for the 11 imported cases, 3 were from Americas, 7 from Bangladesh, and 1 from Kuwait. And the following is about domestic transmissions. As for regional outbreak, in the Gyeonggi-do province Bucheon city, we have the Kupang Logistics Center outbreak, and compared to the day before, we have 46 new confirmed patients. And today, as of 11 a.m. today, a total of 82 confirmed cases have been confirmed. And at the logistics center, if you have been working there since May 12th, these people have been put on self-quarantine, and the diagnostic testings is being conducted. And out of them, about 60 of them are the workers, and the rest are the contacts. And starting from the 12th of May, KCDC requests that if you have started working at the Kupang Logistics Center, starting from this point, we ask you to get tested. Please wear your mask and please be on self-quarantine. Also, if there is a student or a school staff among your family members, they should also stop going to school. And if there is a healthcare worker or social worker among family, they should also limit work. In addition, in Seoul City, at the KB Life Insurance call center, we have the first confirmed case on 21st of May, and now the total stands at 7 confirmed cases. All of the employees have been put on self-quarantine, and testing is underway. In Daegu City, we have done diagnostic testings for all new trainee members for soldiers, and we had 1 additional confirmed case, and also testing for all of the after-school academies teachers. We have also 1 additional confirmed case. As for the club-related cases here in Seoul, as of noon today, we have 2 more cases, and a total now stands at 267. And 96 of them are visitors to the club, while 105 of them are the contacts of these people. And the KCDC is aiming to stop further local transmissions within communities, and we are conducting mass testings of persons who visited public venues and events visited by confirmed COVID-19 cases. We also have the attachment as attachment number 3 in the press kit. We have a list of public venues visited by COVID-19 cases. People who visited such places at the same time are advised to visit a screening clinic and get tested regardless of symptoms. Next is about one of our recommendations for the therapeutics. And for treating the COVID-19 patients, we are currently developing a plasma treatment. And this involves taking out the antibody within the blood of the patient who has successfully overcome the COVID-19 virus. And this calls for us to collect more plasma from our patients who have made full recovery. So if you are willing to donate your blood, please call our call center, and we ask for your cooperation. And as of now, we have 10 people participating in such donation. Next is about schools reopening. We ask teachers and students to strictly abide by the infectious disease prevention measures, And in the metropolitan area, multi-use facilities like bars, clubs, karaoke rooms, and after-school academies and restaurants, we have seen a rise in local transmissions. For those of you who are living in the metropolitan area, please refrain from going to a social gathering or visiting any enclosed, confined, crowded spaces. We highlight this multiple times, but if you belong to a high-risk group, including elderly citizens over the age of 65, pregnant women, persons with chronic illnesses, please avoid visiting poorly ventilated enclosed space frequented by many people. If you need to visit them, please wear your face masks. And regarding the latest outbreak regarding the logistics center, we have found that many people were not wearing their masks inside the facilities, and we advise you to wear your masks at all times if you use break rooms, changing rooms, and other publicly shared indoor areas. And we also ask you to smoke outside of the buildings. And when you commute to work, please disinfect your hands as well. The cafeteria should also operate in time shifts and install dividers between seats, or have people sit on one line or in alternating arrangement in order to avoid sitting face to face while eating to reduce the risks of infection. We also ask you to get tested if 2 or more people within your household or social group develop COVID-19 symptoms. Last but not least, we have a message for the public. Starting from early May, we had the first outbreak of the Itaewon Club, and it has been 3 weeks since then. We did we witnessed sporadic cases among visitors and their friends and acquaintances. However, this has been spreading massively to karaoke rooms and restaurants, as well as the office buildings, and we are seeing a wide, massive expansion of the COVID-19 virus in the metropolitan area. In particular, as for the Bucheon Logistics Center, in just 3 days after the first confirmed case, we have over 70 people who have been confirmed positive. And we are also right now collecting all our efforts to conduct a massive and swift testing. We are currently nearing the end of the testing. However, we believe that the numbers of confirmed cases could increase in the future. And we believe that it is a very difficult it's very compared to the club case, it's relatively easier for us to detect and diagnose the patients at an early pace. And we are concerned of the chains of transmissions that are linking from the Bucheon's logistics center, and we have a high risk of further infection going forward. And this is why the KCDC is cooperating closely with the metropolitan governments to exert our full efforts to curb the virus. And it took only 19 days since the Itaewon outbreak led to a 7th hand infection. And we have identified that one patient could infect others in less than 3 days. And taking this into consideration, we ask for the residents of the metropolitan area to strictly abide by the quarantine protocols. Moreover, if you visit the multi-use facilities, and we ask the owners to comply with the quarantine guidelines, and as there are many other facilities that have a similar nature of the logistics center, where there are a lot of visitors and where it is difficult to keep their face masks on, while it's difficult to have social distancing. And all of these natures are also evident in some other business establishments. And this is also poses high risks of virus infection. Right now, as for distancing and wearing of face mask, there is no other effective therapeutic against the virus. So we ask the members of the public to participate in our epidemiological investigations. And please get tested if you have suspicious symptoms. And especially for the middle-aged and the young generation where there are high ratio of minor symptoms, we ask you to get tested as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Right, that was Kwon Junuk, the Vice Head of KCDC, with Thursday's afternoon briefing. Sua, do give us a summary of the key announcements.
All right, well, let's start with a cluster infection in Bucheon from the Coupang e-commerce company. It looks like we have a rise from the earlier 60-something, I believe, cases that we talked about before. We have 82 cases as of 11 a.m. that are linked to the Bucheon case, and more than 60 were workers at the distribution center in Bucheon, and the rest were other contacts. And it looks like 20% of these cases were asymptomatic cases. And Kwon also had an update on the Itaewon case. More than 260 people as of 12 p.m. are linked to that case. And also we had imported cases from the Americas, from Southeast Asia, as well as the Middle East. Now, what is notable is when comparing the Coupang and the Itaewon case, this was actually mentioned at an earlier briefing in the morning, but these thousands of people that are being tested since yesterday were much easier to trace than the cases related to Itaewon, and that is why it's kind of natural that we are seeing this bigger surge in the span of a day. And the government, the official, also mentioned that this number is expected to increase further. Meanwhile, Kwon also had a message at the end saying that as we are seeing more than 70 cases related to the Bucheon case in just 3 days, and also in the case of Itaewon, there has been seventh-hand infections in just 19 days. People in the metropolitan area should abide by safe quarantine measures.
All right, Sua, thank you for that. We'll see you again on Friday.
Thank you.
The term Untact here in Korea to describe the idea of undoing contact has become a popular jargon in the wake of the pandemic, as social distancing calls on people to avoid unnecessary contact with those around them. Now, this measure appears to have spread to the job market, where recruitment methods and work practices are changing. For more on this, I have Professor Che Sang-mi from Ewha Women's University. Welcome to the program, Professor Che.
Thank you for having me here.
And I also have Sébastien Felati, a journalist at Le Figaro. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Professor Che, I suppose the first rather obvious no-contact interaction for you personally would be that between you and your university scholars.
Yes.
Please tell us a bit more about that.
As you know, the most of Korean university offer only online course, so that's why I'm spending most of my time to preparing my lecture, recording lecture, and then answering the question in cyberspace, and answering back to a lot of questions, having the email from my students. So basically, I spend more time to prepare online activity.
I see. Sebastian, what about you? What form of no-contact interaction are you involved in, given the pandemic?
Well, the thing is, my job is to go in the field across Asia, China, and the rest of Asia. And of course, that's been the last 3 months have been very unique, because 90% of my interview have been on the phone or on a Zoom call, which is actually very frustrating. And I have to say that this week I was very excited, because I think for the first time I went in the field, because I'm in Korea at the moment. So Korea, we can still go around, we can meet people in real, and that makes a big difference to write a good story. So when you do on the phone, you can do a lot of good things, but it's good to see people in real, to feel the atmosphere. So I think the big thing is to be on the phone all the time.
Sebastian, compared to its counterparts worldwide, Korea's no-contact endeavors, so to speak, are more widespread. What do you think, or what was most impressive for you with regard to no-contact endeavors here?
Well, I mean, during the pandemic, one example for me I found really striking was, of course, the drive-through for testing COVID. That was really interesting because it's a way to be very efficient while limiting the risk of contagion. But I think there's something ironic here too, because actually Korea is one of the few countries around the world who had the chance to avoid a proper lockdown. So actually life here has been going on at a slower pace, but compared to countries like China or even Europe, like in France, for several months, people were just stuck home, and at least in Korea there's a contact. So there's an irony here, because Korea is also trying this new normal of they have to limit the contact, but I think overall here the life keeps going on.
Compared to countries elsewhere around the world, of course. Professor Che, the culture of Korean companies and that of foreign firms as well depends on face-to-face interactions, meetings, workshops, and so forth. What impact does the no-contact phenomenon look to have on the culture of Korean companies?
That a face-to meeting, I mean, that Korean firms accessibly like a face-to-face meeting over online, because as you know, face-to-face communication can deliver the abundant information. But if you look at the number of participants in that communication process, the number is so limited. So that's why in Korean culture, Korean firm culture, there are lots of in-groups culture. So only a few people can share important information and can affect that very important decision making. So based on that, if you look at the changes happen in Korean firm, maybe the communication online can be tracked down, can be recorded. So all kind of communication can be more official than unofficial thing. So that's why the maintaining like in-groups culture is much harder, like maintaining old boys network. So maybe we can see more transparency in communication process. So based on that, maybe the performance evaluation of employee can be more objective. So that's a good thing. But the bad thing is like individualism will goes up. So maybe the people worry about that. But in terms of, the performance and the objective, the evaluation thing, maybe we can find many of good things.
Staying with the corporate sector, as mentioned earlier, the recruitment methods are also taking on fresh forms to reflect the importance of social distancing amid the global pandemic. Let's take a look at this next video to see the intriguing changes in the job market.
Recruitment had been pushed back for corporations due to COVID-19, and now they have come up with Untact recruitment methods. For the first time ever, Samsung Group decided to hold its aptitude test online. Job applicants will be holding the tests at home under remote monitoring. The atmosphere has also changed for job fairs, which brought in both job seekers and businesses. 34 SMEs participated in a job fair where everything was done through Untact methods, from handing in resumes to job interviews. Job applicants post up introductory videos, and video interviews have now replaced face-to-face interviews. One employment portal website asked users about Untact recruitment, and 70% of human resources managers and 60% of job seekers stated that they agree on this new form of recruitment. They said Untact recruitment can save time and cost on the whole process, while others said a change is needed in the recruitment process.
이번 코로나19 사태가 발생을 하면서 전면적으로 좀 확대 시행을 했습니다. 그 결과 굉장히 반응이 좋았고, 그리고 앞으로도 계속 비대면 인터뷰를 활성화해서 채용할 그런 계획이 있습니다.
Another factor that saw the most change was the interviews. There are now classes for online interviews and not face-to-face interviews.
이렇게 말을 할 때 좀 입꼬리 올려서, 왜냐하면 지금 보면은 화면에서 얼굴을 굉장히 많은 부분을 차지하고 있어서.
You meet the interviewer on screen in your room, and it's like a face-to-face interview. But what's different is that you must familiarize yourself with seeing your face on screen.
아무래도 새로운 형식이다 보니까 많은 리허설이나 훈련을 해보는 게 중요한데요. 지인이나 친구랑 같이 화상 통화를 통해서 면접 연습을 해보는 것도 좋고요. 그래서 자신의 표정이 어떤지 그리고 또 자신이 시선 처리를 잘 하고 있는지 이러한 부분도 미리 대비를 해보면 좋을 것 같습니다.
Along with the expansion of video interviews, an online job portal came up with a solution for companies to efficiently use video interviews. Interviewees can upload PPT files and other attached files, and a video group interview is possible with up to 64 people connecting simultaneously.
코로나19가 촉발을 하긴 했지만 저희 회사에서도 그렇고 다른 기업에서도 문의가 많은 걸로 보아서는 비단 코로나 때문에 시작한 새로운 방식이긴 하지만 기업들에서도 어쩌면 기존의 방식과는 조금 다른 새로운 인재 채용 방식에 대한 고민을 하고 있지 않았었나 그런 면에서 본다면 코로나 이후에도 어느 정도 화상 시스템이 채용에 결합되는 모습은 여러 번 볼 수 있지 않을까라고 기대를 하고 있습니다.
Sebastian, how effective do you believe are video interviews?
Well, I think video interviews are still a live person. I mean, I think a video interview can bring a lot because if you're having a discussion, it can be very useful. I think in a recruitment process, that could be a first step. But I mean, interview, if it's successful, it's only the first step of training someone, bringing someone to a company, right, to a project. So we need to think about beyond the first step and how do you train that person? Can you train that person purely online? Or I think at some point there will need to be some face-to-face if you want to incorporate someone in a project. But I think interview, it's not a black and white issue. I mean, interview can be a first step and it can also save a lot of time to people because, you know, when you're applying, you have many, you're also busy, companies are busy. It can save a lot of energy and time. But I think also, I mean, there was a really interesting article actually today in the Wall Street Journal was calling about the Zoom fatigue. You know, Zoom is this app which we are all using these days to have all these meetings. And it shows, the scientists are showing that actually you get, as a human, you get tired of being on Zoom because your way of communicating, like I'm doing now, is not exactly the same because you have to wait for the person to respond. So that shows also the limitation. I think video are going to play a bigger role, but we will always need face-to-face. That's going to, and maybe those face-to-face will be more meaningful in the future.
Professor Cho, do you believe this non-face-to-face interviews may serve to perhaps ease the undue emphasis placed on diverse qualifications that a job seeker needs here in Korea?
You know, I don't think the specification what's think very important these days to recruit a very good the candidate is will less important or completely disappear in the recruiting process because you know since simple online interview has a lots of problems such as it's hard to figure out the actual identity of applicants because it's online and also how to capture emotional aspects of applicants. That's why the firms, they want to spend extra efforts to figure out who they are, who their applicants. That's why these days, companies want to use online profiling technology, so which means investigating that applicants' social media and track down what they wrote in online, so that they want to know more about them. So for applicants' perspective, it's much more difficult to hide what unpreferred things and behavior they did in the past time. So yeah.
So they're much more exposed online then?
Yeah, much more exposed online, and they have to maintain and manage a whole life, wide behavior, and manage well to get a good job.
Right. Sebastian, aside from recruitment methods, this wind of change is blowing even in work practices, like you're working from home. And I understand teleworking has been quite common in Europe and the US, even before COVID-19. What is the general response to teleworking in Europe?
I mean, it's definitely a turning point because, of course, working from home was more common than here, but I think it's a huge step. It left also kind of a taboo. You know, until now, a lot of corporations didn't want to allow their employee to roam around in their home to work from home, but now they have no choice. So it's a massive experiment. And of course, the question is there are some costs and benefits, and corporations are seeing the interest. They are actually surprised. I think corporations are surprised that it's working better than they expected, that people can still deliver, be productive. But then if you look at also the employee side, I mean, there are very different kind of situations, because if you're living in a big house, you have a lot of spacious place and not a big family with you, maybe you can focus on your work. But if you're working in a cramped apartment and you have your kids going around, working from home is a totally different experience, right? So it's also increase the social divide in a society, because some people are more privileged, they're gonna enjoy working from home becomes a very kind of a nice experience. It's almost luxury, but for other people who are less advantaged, it might become a burden.
That is true. What, in your opinion, Professor Che, would be some merits of working from home then?
For employee perspective, they can save time for commuting back and forth from work. Also, they can pursue the work and family balance more. Maybe what else? For employee perspective, they can save a cost related with maintaining physical office, and also they monitor that the productivity itself is not very decreased. Even though they practice telecommuting. So these are good things.
Right. Mm-hmm. And for more insight into the trend of teleworking, I also have Professor Eric Jones from Johns Hopkins University live on the line. Hello, Professor Jones.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, Professor. Now, according to a report by the National Bureau of Economic Research, following the COVID-19 outbreak, 37% of jobs in the US were found to be capable of being performed entirely at home, Professor. What is the criteria for deciding whether a job is home-friendly or not, so to speak?
Well, obviously, the criteria for deciding whether a job is home-friendly has a lot to do with the physical relationship with work, right? I mean, if your physical relationship with work is intermediated through the digital world, you can be almost anywhere. If your physical relationship with work is intermediated through the physical world, then unfortunately, you're going to have to go to work. So when we look at that 37% number that you talked about, it's the 63%, I think, that we have to focus our attention on, those people who can't afford to be in lockdown for any significant length of time.
A very valid point right there, Professor. Now, there are some jobs, Professor, that cannot be done at home, and there are some companies that do not support such working practices, which means no income for those who seek such work. What are your thoughts on that? Well,
obviously, it's devastating in terms of the people who are affected. If you think about it, your average household balance sheet is not equipped to provide income that your employer is not offering for periods of 2 to 3 months. I actually live in Italy. We've only just emerged from lockdown after more than 10 weeks. This is a very difficult thing for families who don't have income outside of the home, right? So I think it's going to create income inequalities that will have lasting implications for our societies.
Well, Professor, I hear that you had forecast a growing presence of the practice of working from home in the years to come. What are perhaps some setbacks, further setbacks that is, of working from home?
Well, I think we'll necessarily see more working from home, but there are obvious setbacks. One of them is that you don't create a business culture as easily when working from home. And that's going to complicate not just creating a culture within a business, but the act of merger and acquisition. Because as you combine businesses and need to forge a new culture, I think we're going to see many more problems making these mergers and acquisitions work.
Staying with that, Professor, to what extent can a country's cultural practices and perhaps economic status affect the popularity of teleworking?
Well, I think the popularity of teleworking was accurately described by Sebastian. I mean, if you think about countries that have relatively small apartments or relatively large families, the popularity of teleworking when you're stuck at home in a small apartment with a large number of kids, this is not going to be a very successful formula. By contrast, if you have a lot of space to run around in, then it makes it much easier, right? So people who live in rural communities in an odd sort of way, provided they have adequate broadband access, are much better off teleworking than people who live in crowded urban areas.
Right. All right, Professor Jones, thank you very much for making the time to join us live at this hour.
No, thank you for having me.
Sebastian, how can we seek to make our work from home more effective?
Well, I think it's actually quite challenging because you need to be very self-disciplined because, you know, at home there's a lot of temptation, or there's also a lot of things to do, especially if you have family. But also it requires, if you want to have a balanced life, you're going to have to separate your private life and work life. And when you're home, these boundaries are blurred. So suddenly it can be a challenge for not only your work life, but also your personal life. So I think it requires people a lot of focus. And, you know, we're living in a world where people say we're lacking focus because of all these IT tools, we are distracted, we're an era of distraction. So the question is also whether working from home helps people to focus. I think it's going to be even more challenging. At least when you go to somewhere, an office, it helps you to move to your mind to a different stage of your day. So I think these requires actually to be very strong. And as Professor Jones say, you know, if you're well prepared, it can be a wonderful opportunity. But if you don't have all the best equipment, or you have a context, a family context, a working context more tricky, it becomes a big challenge. So it might make very different situations, different people, and make society more polarized.
Professor Che, it appears that the government here is also looking into adopting teleworking for its field. What are some of the differences between teleworking in the private sector and that in civil service?
If you look at the surface itself, there will be no much difference between the public and private. However, if you look at the nature of work, the public sector need to provide a service for every citizen in our society, which means telecommuting work moves more work online. So there are a lot of people underrepresented, like in terms of using IT devices, accessibility to online. So that's why if they don't put a full effort to maintain similar or better quality to provide a face-to-face service to every citizen in our society, then it's going to create some huge discrimination in that group. The one more thing is to telecommute, much data got to be transmitted online, which means the public sector, they deal more important data in terms of, it can directly relate with the national security and safety of our citizens. So that's why they need to pull attention to securely, transmit data, which means, keeping the cybersecurity very strongly. Yeah.
Keeping what Professor Che has just said in mind, Sebastian, do you see teleworking as becoming much more popular or perhaps less popular in the coming years?
I think it's definitely going to be more popular because for two reasons. I mean, of course, some people might like it because it brings flexibility, especially when you're working in a sector where it's highly digitalized. But of course, corporations are seeing immediately the benefits. They're already looking at a cost saving. They are also facing major economic hurdles. So they're going to look already now, oh, actually it's working. Maybe we don't need to have such a big office. We don't need to pay such a big rent. And they're going to explore in the coming months ways to mitigate those costs. And that might be saying people to stay home. But it's still a big challenge because I think, as we mentioned before, it's very challenging to run a company with no physical contact, and you will still need, especially if you want to train new people, you need people to be part of a group. So I think in the coming months and years, companies are going to try to invent a new way where maybe they can reduce their assets, like fixed asset, like in terms of rent of offices, but still they will need to have a space where they can gather the team regularly. So we might see people coming only half time of the week, or there's a lot of things to be invented. It's quite fascinating, but the big question is, will there be enough job for everyone?
Right, and will we have the adequate infrastructure for that? Professor Che, what is your outlook on the future of teleworking?
The future of teleworking, it's irresistible change on our society because the companies of Korea already realized that by doing so, they can save so much cost related with maintaining physical office. And they according to the news article these days, by just 6% of whole of their employee, they can do the same amount of work done before, So that's why, in terms of cost saving factors, the firms, adopt the telecommuting more. Also, if you look at that effect in industry-wide, the Untact and telecommuting gonna hit the industry, the traditional industry focus on physical spaces and with a large amount of people like theater and retail store, the huge shopping mall, they're gonna face very hard time. So in the perspective, number of work jobs in traditional area will be disappeared. But new job, you expect that new jobs will gonna created by innovation.
Hopefully we'll keep our fingers crossed for that. All right, Professor Che, thank you so much for your thoughts. And Sebastian, as always, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, that is all the time we have for today. Do tune in tomorrow at this hour as we'll look at the rise in regulations and lawsuits worldwide amid the pandemic. In the meantime, do share your thoughts and inquiries with us through our social media accounts or our homepage, arirang.com. Do take care and see you on Friday.